been a while since we've had a chance to record for this podcast. I've kind of been formulating some things around. So my guest today is Dr. Abdullah bin Hamid Ali. Dr. Abdullah, first of all, thanks for coming on the show today. For the listeners or the viewers who aren't familiar with you, can you give them the quick 30-second background of who you are?
Yeah, sure. I'm Abdullah bin Hamid Ali. I'm an associate professor of Islamic law and prophetic tradition at Zaytuna College, which is located in Berkeley, California. I'm also the founding director of the Lamppost Education Initiative, and originally from the East Coast, and actually spent earlier years, first decade of my life in Chicago, believe it or not.
Okay.
Where you're from, Maheen, and but then also spent the rest of my life Philadelphia and other places after that. So
sounds good. I first heard about your initiatives at Lamppost maybe like I won't say 10 years ago. I was actually talking to somebody not too long ago because I became interested in for those of y'all who are familiar with the Islamic legal tradition, the School of Malik. And Lamppost was I remember one of your first articles that I read was about the issue of where you place the hands, right? And it helped me understand a lot of the rationale behind and the idea of following a group of people as a community, and their cults and their customs tied to the Prophet's tradition made a lot of sense to me. So my first intro to you is really like as a legal scholar in that sense. And I don't know if you remember, the first time we met was in Chicago. I want to say in 2013 when you came for a program. I think we only had like 10 people there, but it was in the south side of Chicago, on 47th Street in Masjid Fateh in the Hyde Park neighborhood.
Okay, right. Yeah, right. I remember that.
Yeah. So, but recently, what we're talking today is I really want to talk here about your political theory, political philosophy. Because that's something I think people know you more for now. I don't know. I'm curious how many people think you as like a Maliki legal person. Because that's how I always saw you in the beginning, right? And now I think people who introduce you to now see you more for your political views. But to kick off, right? I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you would identify as obviously you're a black man, you're a Muslim, but also you consider yourself more aligned with a political conservatism in America. And when I think about conservatism, especially from as black conservatism, I feel like that's being more normalized these days, per se. I see that you see the recent election of Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears in Virginia. You have intellectuals like Thomas Sowell. You have pundits like Coleman Hughes. Is it? Is that
right? Yes.
Yeah, and Candace Owens. And regardless of what people think about them, there's a larger there's more conversation and where it's more so acceptable, I would say. I saw a Vice News documentary maybe like 6 months ago where he had a panel of young black activists, both liberals and conservatives, kind of engaging in a very, I would say, respectful manner, so to speak. Whereas in the past, I would think that in some spaces it wouldn't be respectful. It would be like, Uncle Tom, that terms, other derogatory terms are thrown towards black conservatives. But I feel like the conversation is at least happening now. It seems to be much more accepted. What are your thoughts on that? Is black conservatism normalizing? What are your thoughts? I'm an outsider. That's just my perspective.
Yeah, I guess the first thing I have to address is the question of whether or not I see myself as allied with the conservative political right. Of course, I have no formal alliances with anyone, right? And I think that I would say, as I try to constantly clarify to many people who have this assumption about my particular alliances. I have no, like I said, no formalized relationship with anyone. It's more of it's coincidental, right? And it's coincidental to my religious convictions, right? So, politically, if you want to talk about sort of my philosophy, it's pretty much, or the way that I operate when it comes in the political realm, even though I even wouldn't consider myself a very, very political person, as political as people might consider someone like Ilhan Omar or like Linda Sarsour and others like that. I'm not, or Omar Suleiman probably is much more political than I would be, than I am, right? But it's more so a question of where do I see my interests, my religious interests being protected, right? And not just only religious, but also even perhaps even personal interests, social interests, cultural interests. And right now, I believe that that particular the right actually is that particular party where that's actually occurring, and but definitely black conservatism, black conservatism is on the rise. It's even hard for me. It lets you know how much of a conservative I am. You know, it's hard for me to say conservatism, right? But yeah, but it's definitely on the rise. More blacks voted for Trump the last time around than they did the first time, particularly black men. And I think that you can see that changing the more we move forward into the future, that there are going to be more and more black people who actually are voting on the right because of them realizing the big trick that has been played on them by the left for so many decades. And so yeah, I mean, the question of who's an Uncle Tom, who's not an Uncle Tom. I can tell you this, is that part of the trick of the left is that that they have the tendency, they know what to accuse you of, right? You know, if they're accusing you of something, then 9 times out of 10, they're actually the true party guilty of that. And of course, saying all of that, not to say that I'm here to advocate for people to become Republicans or vote Republicans, right? You know, anything. I'm not necessarily advocating for people to vote at all, right? The system is broken, right? You know, but my arguments that I've made in the past and continue to make has everything to do with my concerns, my religious concerns, and my convictions, and ensuring that I maintain, and others like me maintain, the freedom to continue to practice their religion, and to also just simply just have the freedom to think and to raise your children in environments that you believe are healthy for them to grow up in.
I see. What are the points that, by the way, since you know, if there are more black folks who are aligning themselves either not just a Republican with the Republican Party, but just conservative politics, what are the policies like on the ground that black people are, you know, are there because you generally you think about things like affirmative action, you think about like, you know, benefits like welfare, WIC, you know, these kind of issues that seem to center on black populations, but then is it that they are now aware that some of these policies, they may have read something by Thomas Sowell, who I want to get into later, where he says that, like, okay, there actually is no evidence. Actually, it's the opposite. Some of these policies are actually negative towards the black community. Are they becoming aware of that, or is it more? Are there other things? Are they concerned about social, the social liberalism, where certain things? I saw a post the other day where someone said that Joe Biden's administration cares more about the LGBTQ community and pandering to them as their number one priority, and they're ignoring all the other minority communities. What is it that you're seeing that is inclining black people specifically to maybe shift more to the conservative side?
Yeah, I think it's a number of things. I think definitely Thomas Sowell, his ideas do play a part, and realistically, many of the things that his ideas are not necessarily groundbreaking, in the sense that only thing that we can really say about that man is that he follows the facts, right? And he's been able to articulate the reality on the ground, and with regard to the negative impact that certain policies from the left have had on the black community, and he's not afraid to say those things, and he's never really been afraid to say those things. And most black people really didn't know anything about him, and even still today, most blacks or anyone else really don't know much about him, and that can be blamed on the very fact that he's a conservative, and the news media and other powerful institutions in society, that they have not magnified him. But of course, he's 90 years old now, and more and more people are starting to learn about him. But of course, he's highlighted some of the negative effects of things like affirmative action. This is, you know, but I wouldn't necessarily say that is the major contributing factor to so many blacks actually switching over, right, in the area of politics. I think it just simply has to do with other things like reflecting on the fact that when we are constantly complaining about things like institutional racism, structural racism, systemic racism, that the places that are most adversely affected by these claims in these so-called institutions are Democrat-run areas, right? But blacks have been tricked into believing that their plight is what it is. And we're talking about the poor among the blacks, that their plight is a direct result of racist conservative policies. When the conservatives themselves have very little influence on what happens in the inner cities, right? It's actually, these are run by the Democrats. And so once you highlight that, you make that clear to enough people, then they say, you know what, okay, I've been tricked, right? And so a lot of people have been waking up to I think that this is a major part of it. And then also, Hollywood, how we've been brainwashed into believing for, much of my life, as well as that, that my experience is defined by, perpetual victimhood, right? And then people realizing, well, hold up. What are you talking about? We have all these opportunities available to us, and doors are open, and we're just not taking advantage of them. And actually, affirmative action is one of those areas where, in particular, we call sort of indigenous Black Americans don't really take advantage of affirmative action. They're actually more Africans from the continent taking advantage of affirmative action, at least in the university. And of course, a lot of women are taking advantage of this from other races. Are taking advantage of affirmative action, right? So affirmative action and other things like banning the SAT, among other things, fundamentally say to blacks or say to everyone else that Black people are a special species of people, that they're not as smart and as developed as the rest of us, and they need an extra push, right? And we have to make sure that they get the extra push, and we give them a head start so that they can keep up with the rest of us, right? And I think that that's a particular idea that most people, unfortunately, especially Black people, don't often reflect upon. That is a very racist policy, and actually, it actually reinforces the idea of Black inferiority rather than the opposite, right? So, but when so we have to get rid of the SAT because, okay, blacks we don't have the knack for it, but everyone else does, but we're going to do it for Black people. And I also would agree with the statement that, of course, it seems that Biden and the Democrats are much more concerned about LGBTQ issues or civil rights, whatever you want to characterize them as, than other people's issues, right? As a matter of fact, we can add to that, like right now, illegal immigrants, it seems that he's more concerned about the rights of illegal immigrants than he is about legal immigrants and legal citizens overall, because if you're talking about you're going to pay out someone for up to $450,000 for being separated at the border under Trump, boy, that's like that mortgage. That pay for our whole new house. I don't own a house, right?
So are you saying that he's more concerned about illegal immigrants than even LGBTQ, or LGBTQ he is concerned about them at a very high priority level for him?
Right, it's very high priority level, right? For right. And again, I don't even consider. Biden is a Manchurian candidate, right? He's not, he's not making any decisions. And if anyone thinks that, then I don't know, you're just living in la la land,
right?
He's been protected by the media. His image has been protected. His reputation has been protected quite all, in so many different ways. And the mainstream media, which the vast majority is Democrat aligned. And the big tech also is aligned with the Democrats. They cover for him, right? But his handlers, they're the ones making these decisions because they have some other grand plan. And so part of it is divide and conquer. Other aspects of it have to do with, again, just really priorities being mixed up about whose issues should be placed in the foreground. I do think it's much more insidious. I think they know exactly what they're doing. Very small population, right, of people, and anything to have this much power, it makes no sense at all, right? What percentage of the population actually are gay and transgender and bisexual and lesbian, and it's very small, relatively speaking, but have so much power, right? And to be given that much power itself is really, really, I wouldn't say strange, but it's really is unfortunate. But some have theorized that this is just simply the signs of the rise and fall of nations. And so this is typically what happens towards the end of a nation, is that, they become far more effeminate, the men become far more effeminate. And we also could say perhaps it's part of a larger plan to keep the population reduced, right, in number, right? Because they're the elite. Many of the people among the elite, they believe we have too many people on the planet. Right. So if you're encouraging abortion, you're encouraging homosexual lifestyles, you're encouraging transgenderism, you're encouraging population control, right? Yeah, that's really what you're doing. So.
I see. So, like, would you say that their emphasis on illegal immigrants and granting them these like I didn't know it was that much money. Is that in essence, are they thinking about, okay, well, these guys, when they become, once we give them what they want, they'll become immigrants and then they'll side with us? And is it also a ploy to get more Hispanic voters? Is that the reasoning behind it?
Yeah, to be clear, I mean, the $450,000 offer or a potential grant, that in itself is not applied to all immigrants, not all illegal immigrants. This is just simply stated as being compensation to people who are separated during the Trump years. So the elite people came across the border illegally, and then children were separated from their parents, and so. And one family could get up to $1 million potentially based upon this policy. Now, recently, Biden was questioned about this, and he claimed that, no such thing is going to happen. But when all of his handlers were questioned, they see the opposite. They talk about there's going to be some payment given out to these illegal immigrants. The issue of bringing on more Hispanic voter base, I'm not. I wouldn't say it's necessarily about their race, right? That this is about trying to create a captive voter base. There's a realization, I would say, is happening in the Democrat Party, is that as more and more of their traditional captive voter base, like Blacks, for instance, they start to change and leave, and they wake up, that they decide, okay, we need to bring in more people, right, who will be substitutes for this and will be uncritical, right, uncritical voters, right? So since the 60s, the statistics show that since the 60s, that new immigrants to the United States, up to about 80% of them typically vote Democrat, right? And so they're following the patterns, the statistics, and this is why if you study this issue, you'll see that there's been some discussion about potentially legalizing them before the elections, because they want to, take advantage of this. And if they can legalize millions of people prior to the elections, then they can perhaps have a permanent, have permanent power. The Republican Party will never have a chance anymore from now until into the future. So it's, and then other things you need to consider too is the fact that when we reflect upon the two, I guess you would say, the two foundational, three foundational races in America, the Blacks, the whites, and the Native Americans, because if you take this back to 1924, for instance, when they passed the Racial Integrity Act, and they talked about, there's whites and then there's colored, right? So colored was a term utilized to apply to people who are either Black or Native American or mixed, with one of the three different races, right? So what's happened now is that Blacks and whites have gotten so comfortable in the country that the degree to which we actually contribute to American society is very is somewhat superficial, I guess you would say, aggregately in other words, a lot of whites and blacks, you find we are, entertainers, athletes, things like this, it's not to say that we don't have the doctors and engineers and others like that. We have those as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
But many, large percentages of whites and blacks, are not really major contributors to civilization in the same way that we used to be, so like there's a lot of people imported, from the medical field, from India, from China, people, in engineering, people in medicine and other areas like that. And so bringing in fresh blood right into the country, right, in particular, not necessarily from Mexico, but from other countries, right, that in itself does help to sustain or maintain a system, especially if those particular voters are not as politically oriented or politically informed, right, about the different machinations and the different ways that people are being manipulated. And so they'll vote based upon what they imagine to be the truth, right? We watch CNN, watch NBC, whatever they say, okay, that's actually what's going on. So, hey, I'm voting for Biden, right? Or whoever that person may be.
Right. You had mentioned in a actually before I get into that, I wanted to comment real quick. We talked about affirmative action real quick and how it's my own anecdotal experience too that a lot of times Asian folks, whether we're East Asian or Southeast Asian like myself, we benefit a lot from these policies. When I went to undergrad at Ohio State, there was this scholarship called the Minority Scholarship.
Mm-hmm.
And we cashed out on that. I mean, and it's almost like you gave, and the thing is, and those of us who were getting that scholarship, we were like living in the suburbs. Parents were some of our parents were doctors, and they were just still like, it didn't matter, right?
Yeah.
Because it was a merit-based minority scholarship. It didn't like really have any kind of nuances who gets it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was pretty much like I mean. So many people that went there for free and got that education for free. It's kind of like, I mean, it was there, so you can't be mad at them for playing the game, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. Right.
You know what I'm saying? It's there, but it's like, was that really the consequences of or the intent of what they had in mind when they rolled that out?
Right. Mm-hmm.
You had mentioned in another engagement that your first, you kind of grew up in a sense that like understanding the system is broken, not really get involved in the process, which is common, I guess, in both the Muslim community and I think many people in the Black community I've run into as well. Many Black folks who are not Muslims have even said like, well, this system is just rigged against us. So it's kind of like, I'm not going to align myself with either. Or, if there's I'm not going to get caught up in this federal election hoopla every 4 years that everyone, gets riled up. But you did mention you voted for Barack Obama in 2008. What was the rationale, your thought process behind, and that was the first time you voted in the presidential election. Right. What was your thought process, rationale for participating that year and for supporting Obama?
Well, I mean, by the time I had made the decision to vote for Obama, the community had already evolved because prior to that, I would say prior to 2000, the Muslim community, at least those that I had regular contact with in the masajid, the general attitude among Muslims was that you were not allowed to vote as a Muslim, right? We remember back there was the issue with Mahmoud Abdul Rauf. He didn't stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and even though he's Shi'i, but that was a controversial issue, and a lot of Muslims were like, hey, well, alhamdulillah, good for him. He's brave. He's sticking it to the man, right? But that was the general attitude prior to 2000. But eventually, what happened is most Muslims started to become more and more involved in politics. And so 2000, a particular percentage of Muslim, they voted, and largely we call sort of immigrants, they voted for George W. Bush in 2000. But as the years went by, more and more of our leaders started to embrace the idea that it was okay to actually vote, right? So I remember distinctly that prior to 2000, there was a piece that Imam Zayd had written against voting, and I know that afterwards, and it's okay. I'm not saying it's not okay to evolve, but I accepted Imam Zayd's position and a lot of other people's position about the issue of voting. Of course, the years went by, then that particularly changed. That started changing. There was a shift that was happening And then by 2008, I started to pay a little bit of attention to Obama. At first, I was just like, oh, no way in the world that a Black man would ever become president. That was my belief. I actually believed that, that was just impossible. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that made me believe that was that when I was in school, when I was in actual middle school, I remember studying in one class, I don't know if it was social studies or something else, and we had a book, and it listed the different qualifications for president, and it had formal qualifications and informal qualifications. And that particular book had listed among the informal qualifications is that you had to be white. So really? This is actually something I have taught in school, right? I was added to this skepticism about the potential of a Black man actually ever becoming president. So as we got closer to 2008, I went to Barack Obama's website and I actually started to watch some of his videos and look closely at them. And I was like, okay, this guy has a pretty interesting story. His white mother. And I knew right away that was a plus for him, that because that was something, that white people could connect with right away and say, okay, well, he's not fully Black. He's not totally Black. He's not black, but he's like, half Black, right? So he has a white mother and he has a video with his grandparents and they're white. And I said, I think this guy actually has a chance, Mm-hmm. And so I started to watch like everybody. I got caught up like everyone else in the wrapped up in this whole thing, the fervor about Obama and the hope and and change you believe in, all those other things. So I voted. Me and my wife. First time I ever voted in my life. It went with me and my wife, and she new here to the country herself. First time she ever voted too. So we went and we voted for Barack Obama. So that's really how that came about. And of course, as right after the crash in 2008, and then I saw him, automatically start to appoint people who are the establishment people, the old Clinton administration, the people who actually caused the crash itself, and he used them to fix it, and nobody went to prison. And, so I was really turned off by that. And then also, of course, his position with relationship to warfare and intervention in the Muslim world. And the thing was interesting about this is that when I think of the Muslim community, that Obama was key in shifting Muslim attitudes about the Muslim world and even our own connection to America. And what I mean by that is we went from hating America and being opposed to American intervention to now becoming very much pro-American and pro-intervention in the Muslim world, right? That prior to that, Muslims were like, hey, man, so what? Okay, we hate Saddam, but, you're going to cause more pain on the people. Right. If you're talking about intervening, going and invading, the people going to get hurt are mainly the citizens, right? Not Saddam himself, right? But Obama was really key in that, and so we've been on a downhill sort of ride or whatever, however you want to characterize it right now. Since then, in my viewpoint, we've gotten worse, right? Since then.
Yeah, I think that people really wanted Obama, even like I was neutral, like people who have heard this podcast before know that my own political philosophy is that I've always leaned right. I actually had some affiliation with the Republican Party. I was a treasurer of the College Republicans at my community college for a year, right? So, and I volunteered for students. I volunteered for Bush Cheney and all that stuff, right? I still have I think my dad still has the letter in my house. But I think that with Obama, even as someone who's new, because I was like, oh wait, you were still pulling because like the fervor. You read his book. You're like, he just seemed like a genuinely good dude, right?
Yeah, right.
Who was involved in a community organizer. He seemed like someone was relatable. And I remember I was picking somebody from the airport, and this individual had attended one of his White House iftars, right? Mm-hmm. And he was telling me about it, and he was like, and basically, it almost sounded like an admission of how Obama just kind of like veiled him in a way, because they were trying to push back on Obama in some ways and on some of his policies. Mm-hmm. And then he was kind of like, and I'm sure, he's super charismatic on the television. I couldn't I bet in person it's probably at another level, right?
Yeah.
So they were with him in person, and it seems like in whatever they said, like he was able to justify whatever policy he had, and the guy was like, "Yeah, it makes sense. I think and so I think, and the fact that he's got people who are Muslims working in his administration, right? Because that creates a thing. Okay, now this is our country. I'm not saying it's not, but I'm saying it kind of like it changes the narrative. In 2004, when I was doing my all my Bush Cheney campaign, and remember, by the way, people always ask me to clarify. I did volunteer. I ran phone banks for Bush Cheney in 04 when people, and that was like when the community already flipped on Bush, right? But to me, I was just like my ration, and the war had already started. But I was like, well, I was kind of like, well, they're all. It doesn't matter who's in office. There's going to be a war. It just happens to be the guys in power right now. So I'm kind of like just putting that to the side, right? But I remember CARE Ohio, the Council for American Islamic Relations, used to want to set up like voting registration at Ohio State campus, and they would partner with the MSA. And our MSA was having none of it. They were like, because we had enough brothers, people who were on the either on the board or like who had influence, that straight up said that voting, like some people would straight up said voting takes you outside the fold of Islam. I mean, that was still a thing, right? And so a lot of the people, and Howard Dean was popular back then, and then he ran himself off with that scream in Vermont or Iowa, but it was just funny. It was just like back in it was just like a different time, and I wondered if you had told people, and I'm curious. I'm thinking like back in 04, if you said, man, in 16 years. You'd have Ilhan Omar, Rashid Tlaib, but also the issues would be about like you'd have like you're talking about stuff like 70 genders or something, or whatever it is, and people will be like, "What are you talking about?" Right? Because back then, I think it was still, I don't know how much of a moral discrepancy or what's the word I'm looking for? Like people didn't have like a kind of moral dilemma with the Democrats, with the Republicans. In some ways, you could have argued from that the Democrats with the Republicans, there was like I was more in jeopardy because I was obviously supporting the party that was in power and was responsible for the war at the time, right? Because the other issues like abortion was still on the table, but 04 social liberalism to today, I mean, it's like night and day. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's but I remember the whole fervor around Obama and stuff. Do you believe that I was sitting in a gas station in Columbus, Ohio, in the inner city, because I have some family friends that own. This is like around, I want to say around 2011, 2012, right? I went back to visit, and a lot of my friends, they own these gas stations, and they're in the hood. So I'm just hanging out there. And I remember I was talking to one of the patrons, and the guy was just like, he wasn't really happy with how Obama was, what he done for the black community. It felt like, they had expectations for what was going to be done. I heard the same thing when I came back to Chicago, that people weren't really feeling it. In fact, I even heard that under the whole presidential library that's going on right now, or his presidential center, they were going to want to do it in like Hyde Park. And Michelle Obama at one point, I guess she was the director of the University of Chicago Hospital, and that's when they got rid of they got rid of their trauma center. So if anyone was in a neighborhood and had to be had a severe injury, like I remember like a young kid, a young boy, he was ravaged by like a pit bull or something, and they had to like send him out to another hospital, like by Cook County, which is like another 20-30 minutes up the highway, right, versus the University of Chicago. So when they were talking about the Obama Presidential Center, they're kind of like, oh well, we don't really want that here right now, because we remember what Michelle Obama did to us, right? And then they finally were like, we'll let you guys have it if there's if we have the trauma center again. I actually had to go back. Someone was telling me this recently. I have to go back and source it, but it just popped in my head. But I do want to say, there seems like this general sentiment that like Black folks were expecting a lot out of Obama as far as supporting the community, and they really got nothing. Is that your assessment?
No, I think that Black folks don't expect much of anything out of the Democrats, right? Black folks, the only thing that most Black folks expect out of Democrats is for some sort of sentimental sort of gesture. And just the very fact that he was Black was sufficient for most Black people. It's, that in itself is like, that's the carrot, right? It's, just, hey, this guy is Black. The same thing with Kamala Harris. It's the same thing. I know a lot of people, some people out here in Oakland, who they we would tell them, well, what about Biden? The crime bill and things like that. And I say, oh well, he's not really going to charge. Kamala's going to be in charge. We vote for Kamala. We're supporting her. And I would say, well, she ran as a Daisy, right, when she ran for Senate, and then she ran as a Black woman when she ran for vice president or president, right? So it doesn't take a lot to please Black people, right? And most Black people still would, really, they'll get upset with you if you try to attack, you started attacking Obama, even still today. And so most Black people didn't like the fact that people like Tavis Smiley and Cornel West, that they were constantly attacking Barack Obama, right? And they were reasonable. The demands that they had a reason to say, Obama he would come to the Black neighborhood and be like, hey, you guys need to get your families together. You need fathers in the home. You got to get this stuff straight and offer nothing, but then he go talk to the gays and give the gays whatever what they wanted. He'd give the Jews whatever they wanted. He gave everybody else whatever they wanted. But then he come to the Black people and he tell us that, you guys need to get your act together. He didn't offer anything, didn't have to offer anything at all. And people will get upset about that. But at the same time, they would still vote for him, and they still defend him because, again, most Black people, again, are all you need to appease most Black people, unfortunately, is for you to speak to them in a nice way. And this is unfortunately the same situation with most Muslims, it seems, right?
Mm-hmm,
is
right.
that speak to them in a nice way, talk to them as if you're really their friends. You really don't have to give in to any demands, even if there are any demands. Like, for instance, right now, look at this. Biden's in office now, but prior to him running for office, there was a whole lot of talk about reparations. That stopped right away. People were like, oh, I'm going to vote, the Democrats there for reparations. Sure, everybody's for reparations. And then he's in office now. He's ready to give reparations to illegal immigrants, but not, there's no talk about, and there's no uproar. Blacks are not, in an uproar about this. And partially because they're unaware of what was happening. Mm-hmm. And most people just wanted to get rid of Trump. They said, out of sight, out of mind. Trump is gone. I can go back to doing what I was doing before, even though they won't let you do that. People keep trying to go back to normal, but they're not going to let you go back to the normal because this is the new normal, as they say. Right. But and in the process, there are a large number of Blacks who are waking up, right? And so many of them are defecting. They're leaving the Democrat Party. It's not, a very, very high number. I think that the Democrats still has a hold on the vast majority of Blacks, but I do think that there are significant number of defections in light of everything that's happened, right? So there were some people, again, high up in the community, or among our sort of intellectual, or the intellectual class, in the Black community, and a small minority of them who actually were expecting quite a bit from Obama, and they were making reasonable demands, but the community they didn't back those people, because for them to criticize a Black man is anathema, right, to Black culture, especially in the face of when you're living under white power structure, so it's like, white people definitely can't criticize Black people. And if you're criticizing a Black man, right, alongside using similar arguments that white people are using, then those who have been indoctrinated into the liberal progressive thinking, that they believe that in itself is a direct attack on the whole community.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I think there was a sentiment that, like, Obama being elected in 2008 was like ahead of the curve as far as like the time frame of when it was expected for a Black man to become president of the United States. And it was, you probably have this rationale that, like, well, we actually got there ahead of schedule, so we actually don't care what he does. That in itself is progress. That's enough. He could pretty much do whatever he wants for 8 years and we won't care. The fact that he made it there ahead of schedule is good enough for us.
Yeah, and the thing that's interesting about it too is that once he actually won, all the talk about like what Black people couldn't do, all that stopped altogether. And they were saying that this is proof that America has changed, proof that America that you can do whatever you want, that you set your sights on. Then all of a sudden Trump becomes president, and then it's like all of a sudden America has never changed. It's been the same the whole time. We're living Jim Crow again. We're living in the 60s, and again, that trick.
Right. Yeah.
And in every election cycle, all they got to do is inject some type of racial incident, some type of racial issue into the election, and most Black people, they buckle because they're, oh, you don't like me, I'm not voting for them, I'm voting for the other guy, right? So.
Yeah, I was having a conversation about a month ago with a good friend of mine. He recently graduated from Howard Law School, right? He's African American from the South Side of Chicago, and we were talking about, and it was like kind of a mixed gathering, but I heard it, and we were talking about he had mentioned that there's a lot of these thinkers now that their books are prevalent. Like it was like Ibrahim X Kendi, How to Be Anti-Racist. He's like, and he mentioned specifically like some of these guys. They write about like us Black folks, like we are completely incompetent of anything, that we need all this, assistance. And it's almost insulting. Right. Now my friend became aware of it because he said that the whole critical race theory and the ideology of CRT was being pushed super hard at Howard Law School. Right. To a point where it becomes like obvious something is up. Right. And, he talks about how his upbringing from his father was such that that required like kind of like personal accountability, ownership. I mean, enough for him to eventually go to law school. He was like, this doesn't resonate with my own upbringing, and I wasn't rich. I grew up in the South Side of Chicago, in they call the Roseland neighborhood, which they call the Wild Hundreds. So because of the violence and everything there, right? But it was interesting to hear his point of view there. Unfortunately, when you speak when I use that example, and I speak to especially like immigrants who may be aligned with liberal politics or leftist politics, they generally just don't want to hear it. It's like, oh, it's an anecdote, and it's just and you shouldn't be speaking about that. You shouldn't be perpetuating that narrative either. If that's his opinion, that's his opinion, but they didn't want to hear it. But I feel like, go ahead. So I think there's a lot of those guys out there. There's more of these voices out there. It's like, but it's almost like a silent majority in a way, because some of them, they can't even speak up. So my buddy's working in a law firm now, corporate law firm. I think if he spoke out and like said what he really thought, it could also result in some kind of career suicide as well, because of the narrative that's being shaped.
Right. Well, I mean, I would say that the reason that they don't want you to promote the narrative is because it doesn't match up with the caricatured, the sort of the image that they have of what a real Black person is, right?
Right.
This idea that a real Black person is a person who's poor, who's been totally destroyed or damaged by the system, taken advantage of, can't help him or herself, and needs someone else like them to step in to give them that extra push, right? But when they see a confident, independent Black person, that this itself, it undermines that particular narrative. And unfortunately, they don't realize that it's a racist sort of picture that they have of a Black person. And they actually are just simply reinforcing the progressive, the Democrat, very negative, racist definition of Black person, right? In the process, rather than simply saying, hey, good to know that you feel that you're confident, that you're responsible, that you're taking care of yourself, that you're independent, you're successful, and you did that despite all of the challenges that probably existed for you in American society, right? And so this is really the issue, is that most Blacks define the Black experience on the basis of perpetual victimhood. And the main reason for that is because of decades of indoctrination by the leftist media, by the Democrat media, which is the vast majority of the media, by Hollywood. We've been programmed to do that, and through the academy as well, have programmed us into thinking this way. On the other hand, you find the blacks, other blacks, which are minority, and I consider myself among the minorities, and this includes people who are members of the former Nation of Islam, is that we define our experience on the basis of what we have overcome. Even Martin Luther King Jr., that was his particular attitude, was that, they even had a song about it, "We Shall Overcome," that our experience and our history has been defined by us overcoming adversity, to be, living and enduring in spite of all of the challenges, right? The Jim Crow, of black codes, of voter rights suppression, and police brutality, all these other things, right? That we've overcome those things, where we've survived. That it's really interesting and amazing that you don't find a high rate of suicide among Black people, despite of everything that has happened, right, throughout history. Now, of course, that could be changing today, because the more you embrace the victim narrative, the more likely you're going to feel helpless and hopeless, and you probably be led down that particular road, right? So that particular path. So it's so you just have these two vying or sort of conflicting paradigms that do exist. And for those actually who want me to just say, "Hey, I'm a victim. I can't do anything without your help, right? I can't get hit without your help," and then they consider me to be I'm sort of out of touch. I'm a Uncle Tom. I'm a house Negro, right? And I'm just like, okay, how am I the house Negro when I'm the one who's been censored? I'm the one who's been sort of blacklisted. I'm the one who's been denied access. I'm the one who's not being invited to the big conventions or this or that, right? Not that really means anything to me, right? But I'm just making the point about how can you consider an outcast, the house Negro, right? When the person with all the French benefits are the ones actually, yes, everyone else, all the other people who was like, I'm a victim, I'm a permanent victim, right? Those are the ones actually getting all the French benefits that come with being part of the crew. It's part of the team.
In the beginning of our conversation, you had mentioned that a lot of your political philosophy is really defined by, and correct me if I misrepresent it, is defined by what allows you to practice your own lifestyle, your religion, your faith, without interference, right?
Right.
And I think that's the roots of conservatism, are like the foundational roots is like there's a, it's that government is inherently, the more government control is bad. Yeah. And so we should have minimum government. And so the less we have, and then we had the flexibility. It just, the government's there just to make sure there's a complete anarchy either. But, so and to me, that it almost sounds like more libertarianism. Have you ever explored the Libertarian Party to any extent, if you were to align with a party? I know,
no, not really. I wouldn't necessarily equate it with libertarianism. Because the libertarians, they are somewhat morally agnostic, right? And conservatism, mainstream conservatism, to me is not morally agnostic, right? That there is why is it, what makes it easy for you to live with small government is that people that they police themselves. People are trying to live virtuous lives. People, they don't need the state to step in to prevent them from murder and from all types of other decadence, right? And again, I see that as more so my Islamic understanding, rather than a political understanding. So it wouldn't be so much, okay, well, those ideas are informed by conservatism, or political conservatism, but they're confirmed by my Islam. And I think that mainstream conservatism is much more in line with that, even though it, of course, it may be a little bit more liberal or progressive, quote unquote, than my Islamic beliefs allow for me to be, right? Because, of course, they embrace gays as well, right? Because my Islamic beliefs doesn't allow for me to accept, the gay lifestyle as being morally legitimate, right? It doesn't allow for me to do that. Right? But the Republicans would totally embrace a gay person. They totally embrace a transgender person, right? They would do that. You see, and libertarians a little bit more. So it's like, listen, hey, really, hey, if you should be allowed to smoke whatever you want and have sex with whoever you want and everything and harm yourself, as much as you want, right? And I don't believe that that's not something that goes along with me. And at least that's kind of like how I see libertarianism. That's sort of the direction that it goes, right? So, and although I understand its roots, right, philosophical roots and historical roots, and that's why certain people would adopt that. But I think that that the society should actually protect members of the society from harm. Right, we have in Islam, even if a man becomes a spendthrift, that Islam allows for us to step in to prevent him from spending his wealth, right? So you don't want someone to just spend up all their wealth and then they end up in the poorhouse. No, that we protect them from ending up in the poorhouse, right? So I do believe that there's a place for that at times, right? But it's in a very limited fashion. So,
yeah, because that example you gave about the spendthrift. Under traditional American conservatism, like limited government, they would be like, "Well, spend all you want," right? Yeah. And if you end up in a poorhouse, that's your problem.
Yeah, right.
Or we actually won't even have a poorhouse because right. That's not that's like who's gonna, unless someone out of their own philanthropy wants to like start one up, right? But right. The government is like, all right, if you want to do it, but then don't come crying when you're done. That's kind of it's interesting because the whole even the social conservatism, which used to exist in the Republican Party, I remember George Bush saying up there, the marriage between a man and a woman, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that ship has sailed, right? It doesn't seem like that element of the Republican Party, that social conservatism, is there anymore that you alluded to, because it seems like it's just that, and that's a problem with the party itself, like the idea of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. It's like it continuously evolves, and it has its roots in certain ideas. But then certain things after a while, you're like, well, we can't deal with that anymore. That
expediency, political expediency, right?
Exactly, right, that takes over. Yeah, because at this point, if you have somebody, if you had a Republican candidate run, on some like very like a moral majority candidate, like Jerry Falwell or something, like let's say someone like that ran as president, it would just like he would just be laughed off, right? Right. Exactly, you know what I'm saying? Right. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's even Trump didn't align with that. Now, when you speak to like a lot of Trump voters, when I would meet Trump voters at work, when I my last company, I think they were kind of just like, yeah, well, they didn't agree with the LGBTQ lifestyle necessarily in some ways, or they'd be like, well, I don't really care about them. It's more like an indifference, so to speak, right? And right. I think that's kind of how Trump himself. I mean, like I think everyone understood that Trump wasn't some kind of like moral candidate, right? I think Bush tried to George W. Bush tried to like portray himself that way. I don't know how much of that is true or not. I mean, he certainly seemed to have some inclination towards like faith and being Christian and and whatnot.
During his first term, that was his first term. Yeah, he did do that quite a bit. Recovering alcoholic and things like that. So and going to church and believing in God, right?
Right.
So the war against good and evil, right? So
yeah. So it seems like that's the kind of thing, and I'm, but it's interesting because I still find when I speak to evangelical Christians, they were still very much, now the only thing they hang their hat on is abortion, right? That like there's still single issue voters on abortion. And one thing that this is my own theory, I want to get your take on it. And I kind of came to this conclusion in around 04-05, right after the Bush-Cheney that election in 04, is that the Republicans don't actually ever want to overturn Roe v. Wade. Because if they do, then it becomes a non-issue. It's almost like a dangling carrot, because they know people are going to vote on that own issue. And as long as it's out there, they can be like, look at all these babies being killed, right? And use that as a carrot to still have these like voters in Appalachia who only care, or wherever, Middle and Northern Indiana in the Bible Belt, who will only vote on that issue, right? What are your thoughts on that? Is them using that? Because that's kind of a friend of mine was telling me this, and I was like, actually, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, yeah. Well, if this was, I would agree with that if this was the party, the pre-Trump party,
Yeah.
right? But with Trump fundamentally destroyed the Republican Party, right? The old Republican Party is gone, right? There's a new voter base in the Republican Party, and these are like normal people in society, less politically savvy, but less restrained with regard to their opinions about a lot of these issues. But the new Republican Party, and it could have happened. The same thing could have happened with the Democrats if Bernie would have just had a spine, right? And just called them out for them pretty much stealing things from them. But the Democrats, the original, the neoliberal Democrat establishment is still there. The Republican neoliberal establishment has been trying to revamp itself, but they can't because the base is just not down with the stuff and all the war and the crony capitalism anymore, right? But so I believe that the new party actually probably doesn't really care, right? That is not about as much about political calculus anymore, because you're talking about majority of the people themselves are not financially benefiting from the political status quo. So like people like what's her name, Marjorie Taylor, I think Marjorie Taylor Greene, for instance.
Yeah.
Right. People like her, I feel like, okay, hey, she totally down with, hey, if Roe v. Wade overturn it, right? Let's do it, right? I think they're serious about it, that they want to just overturn it. I don't know what new issue that they would focus on. They might turn to Islam again. I don't know what they would do, but basically, I'm not really completely convinced that they are not serious about actually overturning it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and it explains the whole Christian fervor that why they were still again, supporting Trump in the last election. There's anything else. So, in the last few years, I think you've been, this is the whole, I think we talked a little bit about what's guiding your philosophy, I guess, like limited government. And it just so happens that a lot of what you're seeing, you're just pointing out points and policies that are in agreement with what you already believe, right? And then that's the point. So people, because I think when people see your social media and they see, like right now, what are they going to see? They're going to see some stuff on COVID-19 vaccines. They're going to, before they see some stuff on Trump, and they automatically, there's like, these are already, and so these are things that automatically they're like, I think a lot of people reach out because, being a podcast host and someone who's I've interviewed you on Mad Memlook before a few times. People know that we have a relationship, so they'll ask me like, "Hey, is Sheikh Abdullah like purposely being a contrarian?" I might even like call this episode "Conservative" or "Contrarian," right, or neither, or whatever, right? But like, social media. What's and people who know you in person, who have met you in person, and they can see what's in from this conversation is that you seem to be a very like reasonable, even-tempered kind of guy, right? So I think that's what's got people confused.
Yeah.
I think people are just confused. They can't grasp this idea that like some policy that's happening by whether Donald Trump or whoever, or some talking point on the right, this is something you already agreed with, and you're just pointing that out. Is that what it is?
Yeah. I mean, well, I'll put it like this. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. It has multiple narrations of it, and it's very popular. And it says that my ummah will never unite upon misguidance. And that means, for most people, when they hear that means that if the majority of Muslims are going in one direction, then it means that Allah's on their side. But that's actually not what the hadith means. That's not what the way it was understood by the early community. The early commentators in hadith, they'll say that what this means is that if most people are moving in the wrong direction, there's always going to be somebody who's going to come out and say, you know what, you're going the wrong direction, right? We're supposed to be going left, not right, or we're supposed to be going right, not left, right? And so in that sense, there's never going to be a time where every single Muslim was going to actually be doing the wrong thing or having the wrong opinion, right? Secondly, the early fuqaha, they didn't see themselves as legislators, right? So Imam Shafi'i has a famous statement where he says, "Laysa lil mujtahidi an yusharra," that the mujtahid does not have the right to legislate. And what that meant was that when they had opinions, they gave fatwas, it wasn't simply out of convenience. They were basically, they weren't just looking at people and say, "Oh, well, I think this person, is probably not strong enough to accept or to act upon this particular judgment, right? So I'm going to give them an easy judgment." No. They ruled on the basis of what they thought Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, had ruled in the way that they thought Allah had ruled on that issue, right? Rather than just simply is about sort of benefit, harm analysis, and just some sort of moral dilemma and just sort of go with take the easier path. No, it was about, listen, I believe this, right? You see, but those judgments always have to be built upon fact, objective fact, right? And so if you're not dealing with objective fact, and then you pass a judgment or you give us fatwa, then you actually have fundamentally given a fatwa, a faulty fatwa, a faulty judgment about an issue. And what I see quite often, in my opinion, is that Muslims are not their reality and people's realities, not just Muslims, but the vast majority of people's reality is being mediated, right? And they are being led to assume or believe that something's real when it actually is not real, right? Right. And so I understand, like, okay, if I post something and people's like, "Oh my, what's going on with him?" I say, okay, but what's going on with me is that I've done a little bit more research than you have, and I've reached a conclusion, right, that is different from your own, right? You reached a conclusion, and I disagree with your conclusion, and I can understand. I feel that your conclusion was built upon a something which was not factual, right? A factual articulation of what's actually happening in the world on the ground, right? See? So that's really what I would say about that is, and so it's not so much of me wanting to be a contrarian. I actually I want people to like me just like everybody else, right? Right. I want to be embraced too. That's only natural, human beings, However, again, that my commitment to my religion, my commitment to just being sincere to my God, right? It doesn't allow for me to just simply go with the crowd. I've never been a group type of person anyway. So that's the other part of it as well, is that anytime I've felt that someone wanted to get me involved in some type of cultish relationship, right, that I've always, felt an aversion to that, and I pull back, right? And the only time that I can remember in my life and my youth that I was really passionate about actually getting on board with what everyone was doing was during the breakdance days, right? Because I remember, I think I told the story to someone before, that you remember patent leather sneakers, right? With the big shoestrings, right? The patent leather sneakers.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So everybody was buying those, right? And around this time, my mother and father had broken up. My mother was working, so she had limited income. And I remember I went to my mother, I asked her, I said, Mama, would you buy me some patent leather sneakers? I forgot how old I was, maybe 13, 14 or something like
was that. This like the 80s? Because like I remember they probably brought them back. Because like
it was 80s.
In my era, like the big patent leather sneaker came out was the Jordan 11, which came out in 95.
No. This is before that.
Okay. Right.
No, this is in the 90s. 80s. It's 80s. This is in the 80s, right? So my mom said to me, she said, okay. So I was excited. I'm waiting for mom to bring me those sneakers. 1 week go by, 2 weeks go by. Then I realized, okay, you know what? Mom, she's not going to buy me my sneakers, right? And so that's really, I said, in my life, it's just me, my personality, just how I am, my temperament. And I don't really do well when people try to expect me to conform to the groups, dictates.
Right.
So I think, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I do, again, I feel that in order for a true revolution to happen, for change to happen, you have to have someone with courage, right? And of course, that person with courage should be informed by wisdom and by knowledge, right? So I'm not one of those people, when something happens, I just jump on like the social media and just post it, right?
Right.
I try to give things, especially the bigger events, then big things happen, big news comes out. You always have Muslims there posting this, oh, I condemn this, I condemn that, and we should support this, support that. I usually give it a few weeks, I give it a few days, I give it a week, right? I want to see like if there's some counter narrative that's going to come out, right? See. Give it some time, and then after I gather myself and I say, okay, this is someone give me some other idea to reflect upon, another perspective to think about before I decide to actually do a post about this controversial event that just happened, right? You see, so I'm just not as impulsive as a lot of people, my peers I've seen, in this particular regard.
Right. I feel like there's almost a pressure. Regarding your peers, not to mention names, I think there's almost an inherent pressure to conform in a way that it's because it's your community, and like I said, people don't like to be it's human nature that you want to get along with everybody. And I remember I was telling you something. I think I saw a post once, like maybe a few months ago, where you were given the Friday sermon somewhere in Oakland, and somebody walked in and saw you and like left.
Right.
So I was like, oh, dude, like you can't be like, oh, I didn't know there's a thing in Islamic law where if you don't like the khatib, you can skip Friday prayer.
Right. Yeah.
It's not like they can't. I mean, it's not like unless there's some creedal issue, like, oh, I know this person is like a
right. He's not a kafir. He's like he's left Islam or something like
that. Right. Although the way they talk about you, it's like they almost want you to be that.
Right. Exactly. Right.
But I think it's I forgot. I just heard that story just came to my mind, and I lost my train of thought. So basically, and then sometimes what happens is that like they get close. I was in a club, I was in a clubhouse room with Dr. Yasser Qadi, he had this, he was part of his masjid. They actually invited like a police officer who was African-American to speak about like, police relationships and stuff like that. Right. And, so he had a club, and this wasn't the topic of the clubhouse room. The clubhouse room was him and I don't know if you know Professor Andrew March, from UMass. So they were in this clubhouse room talking about contemporary issues, and somebody got on the mic and was like started grilling Dr. Yasser Qadi about like this police thing that he like, kind of like interrogate, and you could tell he's really uncomfortable with it. And he kind of was like, hey, well, we talked to him about it before. He was trying to like, jump, because you don't want to, the point is you don't want to like, as Muslims in I don't know, but as far as us, we feel like there's a kind of like right that other believers have upon us, right? As far as like not offending them and, not, being the wrath of their prayers, et cetera, right? And sometimes people take some of these things to the point where it's like, all right, you did this, so therefore you must be held accountable for this. Right. And sometimes you're just like, hey, listen, I wanted to have the conversation and I'm not looking at it from you, but at the same time, I don't want to deal with the stress of you coming after me on this.
Right.
Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's why a lot of your peers may just be like, all right, well, it is easier for my own sanity not to deal with this.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Go ahead, finish your point. Go.
No, that's all I was saying. But I see that as well. I agree that a lot of times, because when you speak to some of these people individually one-on-one, they tell you exactly what they think.
Yeah, right.
But they're too afraid to say it up front. And I'm not mad at them for it, to be honest, because to be honest, if I was in their situation, I probably would be more like them than you, because especially if there's financial implications to do it, right? I work in corporate America. If my company, for example, started a mandate that I have to put like gender pronouns in my email signature, which I would assume is going to happen in the near future, right? Just because the way things are going in our society, I'm going to conform with it. I'm not going to give up my paycheck for something like, all right, yeah, I'm a he him. The funniest was I had to explain to my boss, this old white guy. like what a gender pronoun, like the idea of gender pronouns, because he was
Right,
like
right.
oblivious to it, right? And I was like, and I was like, yeah, you know, you don't have to put this in here, and I showed him examples and stuff, and I'm like, yeah, because I'm like, listen, it's just not gonna, like I'm not gonna die on that sword, right? That paycheck is, you know, that I don't have a side hustle. It's not like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
else.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just like whatever, man. It's just, and
yeah,
I think that's where a lot of folks are at. Maybe
yeah.
your peers, you're talking about other like people in the religious clergy field. Hey, listen, it's just something that like we don't want to like, you know, go out of some. They might try to justify it in a way. They'd be like, well, there's bigger priorities, right? Or people are
Mhm.
struggling with faith, or people are not even praying. So let's
Yeah,
just work with them on that, and then. But it's really a thing of like, hey, I just don't want to ruffle. You know, there's
yeah, yeah, exactly.
you know, I don't want anyone messing with my bread. That's what it comes down to, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, I totally agree with that. I'm one thing that makes it easy for me to do or to say the things that I do say is because I'm not in that type. I don't have that type of pressure on me from my job.
Yeah.
Now, of course, I was doing some of these things like this even before it became easier for me to be as open, right, as I am right now at my job. It hasn't always been the same as Zaytuna for me in this particular
Right.
regard,
Mm-hmm.
right? But things have gotten better in that particular regard, you know. But um, so I totally relate to people, right, who are like, okay, hey, man, this is not easy for me, you know. I'm always finding people who are privately comment or I see them and they say, hey, really appreciate what you're doing. You know, we you know, we're cheering for you. We're, you know, watching you very closely. You know, I mean, but the same people they won't like or share anything. And I said, and I get that too. Like I said, no problem. So I know that a much larger, you know, percentage of the Muslim population actually do come to my social media than peers, right? So, because I'm always running into people who are telling me, right, you know, and I've even had two people tell me that I don't like why they don't like and share. You know, I'm not, you know, I might get promotion, I might get fired from my job or whatever. I don't want to be, you know, wanting to lead to that. So, so I do relate to it, but I do think on the other hand, for certain people, right, in our community, if you are going to articulate a public political position or take a public stance politically, you should at least fully like understand what's going on before you say what you have to say. I mean, our community's very immature, right? But I would say most of our community, most members of our community are just simply unaware of a lot of different things. And one of the problems in the masajid is that you have boards who consist of people who are most of the time not, you know, learned people in religion. They come from, of course, the secular fields and engineers and others like that. You know, not knocking any of that stuff. You know, they're important, and there's a tendency to not really think things through, right? Long-term effects of certain decisions. So if you decide that, well, we're not going to allow so-and-so to speak in this masjid or this topic to be talked about in the masjid, that's going to have some long-term negative effects, right? So for instance, if let's say, okay, you decide that we're not going to talk ever about the Prophet's marriage to Aisha radiallahu anha, right? Or we're never going to talk about the issue of slavery or the concubine issue or the hitting verse, or you understand? And you hide all of that information from your children, you're hiding from the people of the masajid. The moment that a non-Muslim person who doesn't mean well for the community brings those things up, it's going to be a challenge of faith right away. You see, you know, and when our institutions are not, they're not founded upon proper Islamic education and a goal of trying to deepen faith and to operate from a Quranic paradigm, a Sunnah paradigm, right? Then what are people going to embrace? They're going to embrace whatever is popular philosophies. They're going to embrace feminism. They're going to feminist theory, gender theory. That's what they're going to embrace. They're going to embrace secular humanism. Right? That's what they're going to be influenced by. Right? See, and so it's become almost impossible for you to have an argument with the feminists if the feminist already believes that patriarchy is evil, and then you start quoting the Quran, "Ar-rijalu qawwamun 'ala an-nisa," that men are the caretakers of women. So right away, she already has accepted this idea that patriarchy is evil, and then she reads the Quran, and the book says that men are the caretakers of women. So right away, it's like, there's something wrong here. To her, in her mind, right? But she's not being critical towards her own assumptions.
Yeah, right.
But everything else is being examined on the basis of the assumptions that she adopted from someone else. So imams and scholars have an obligation, that you have an obligation to not conceal knowledge. You have an obligation to show courage, right? You see, and to risk yourself, risk potentially losing that, right? And the same thing for those individuals who actually are responsible for the masajid, that those who are members of the board, that you can't bring into the masjid someone who's actually teaching that, don't worry about your provision, don't worry about your risk, right? Your sustenance from Allah. Allah is going to give everybody their sustenance. And then the moment that something controversial is stated in the masjid, and then you say, okay, we can't talk about it anymore because we're afraid we're going to make one of our donors upset, right? And he's going to take away that cash. Okay, well, so you don't believe that Allah is the provider, the best providers, but you want people to come into masjid to teach the congregation that, right? So I think that disqualifies you from being an actual custodian of this community center, of this masjid, right?
Sure.
That's where I see it, is that, if you're not fit, like I was in Dallas just last weekend, and I mentioned the fact that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for instance, he comes to Abu Dhar, and Abu Dhar comes to the Prophet, and he asks the Prophet, Ya Rasulullah, appoint me to a position, put me in service, make use of me, right? He wanted to do something officially, in official capacity. And the Prophet, he responded to Abu Dhar and said to him, Abu Dhar, you are unfit. Anta da'if. Inni araka da'ifa, that you are unfit, right? And then he goes on to tell them, and because of that, do not be the leader. Do not lead two people, right? Do not be their amir of two people, and do not take on the guardianship or the responsibility of the property of an orphan, right? So in other words, is that not everybody is fit. Another Sahabi, Abdurrahman bin Samura, he comes and says the same thing: give me an appointment. But the Prophet ﷺ response to him was that, don't ask for it. Right. He didn't tell him that you're not fit. He said, just don't ask for it, because if you ask for it, then you're going to be left to your own devices. Allah is not going to give you his help. Right. But if it's given to you without asking for it, then Allah is going to come to your aid, right, in that situation. Right. So in other words, the point I'm making is that as a position, a person who's a leader, a person responsible, right, for a masjid or a community center, that if you're unfit, right, to be there, right, then you need to step down. And one of the things that make you fit, you have to have courage, right? You have to be willing to tell people what they need to hear, right? Even if sometimes when it hurts their feelings, right? And so a lot of times what happens is you have these like one or two people will come complaining, I don't like what the imam said in the khutbah today, right? And then we pay attention to that one or two persons who actually come and complain, and we ignore the other, like the 98% or the whoever number it is that had no complaint at all. Everyone else is cool with it, but it's always one or two people come complaining, and we'll make some drastic changes on the basis of what one person has to say, one complaint, right? So I think you get the point.
Yeah, I got you. So I want to segue a little bit. Thomas Sowell is somebody we alluded to earlier in the podcast. And you're one of the first people I know that actually brought his name to my attention. Because you share some stuff. Talk a little bit about who he is and how his works have influenced your way of thinking, if at all.
Right. Well, Thomas Sowell is, in my view, one of the great thinkers of the 20th century, this last century that we've had. He's a 90-year-old man who's an economist and a social thinker, among other things. His multiple books. He teaches and writes for the Hoover Institution, which is associated with Stanford University, he's he's studied under some of the great economists of the 20th century, and he's a conservative. He's a member of the Republican Party, and because of that, very few people know about him. And in my view, had he been a Democrat, he would have been much more widely known than someone like Noam Chomsky, right? I think he's smarter than Noam Chomsky in my view. I think he's more worthy of being the 8th most quoted person in human history, like they say, as the case with Noam Chomsky, right? But it sort of shows the way that politics works in this particular regard, and there's a tendency to think as well, like Thomas Sowell is just simply some Black commentator who only likes to comment about Black people. But you just read his books and you listen to his videos, watch his videos, it's very clear that he has a lot to say about all civilizations. It's just that certain people only notice what he has to say about Black people because, that's, their particular pet peeve, when you have a Black person either criticizing or encouraging Black people to do better, right? Then we live in a culture where those things are not really considered to be lawful for one to do.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. The little I know about him is I understand he used to be a Marxist.
Yeah, he was. Right.
In his youth. So I had a chance to, there was I think a documentary, I think it's on YouTube, but it was also Amazon Prime about his evolution, which is really interesting. Right. But when I was listening to some of his philosophies, it was well, some of this is just common sense.
Yeah.
Right. It's just for example, he talks about how one of his rules for economics is there's finite resources, right? And then, but politicians act like there's infinite resources and everything is utopia, and that we are trying to compare everything to utopia versus so America, so what's happening in the United States, for instance, which is maybe his context. Right. We were like, oh, it's not as good as heaven, so therefore it sucks. Right. Compared to other countries, there's clips of him about affirmative action and saying hey, no, the data shows it does not, it's negative because you have to stratify the data across other parameters, look at different cases, look at the people, when people are getting married, civil rights acts, all these kind of stuff. What else is going on here, right? So there's multiple variables. So yeah. So
a lot of the things that Jordan Peterson gains popularity for stating, Thomas Sowell had already stated those things, decades in advance, right? With relationship to gender pay gap and among other things. And one of the and it's not necessarily an insight, but I think that one of the other statements that Thomas Sowell popularized, or facts that he was able to sort of magnify, was the fact that governments don't produce anything, right? And because there's this assumption in the minds of a lot of people that governments actually are producers. Governments don't produce anything. The only thing that government does is they extract taxes, and they manage the money and spend it. They take taxes from you, and they spend it on the things that they want to spend it on. They're supposed to be spending it on to your benefit, right? And I think that he's probably been, at least in my life, he's done a much more effective job in highlighting this particular fact. And people have the tendency to think that income tax, for instance, as well, is an example of government being generous. No, the government's not being generous. The government's giving back money, your own money. They took it from you, and they just give you back a part of it. It's your money that they took from you. But again, all these tricks are utilized, right, to make us think there's something else is going on.
Right. Yeah. It's I recently came across there's a podcast, because Thomas Sowell himself isn't really someone who does a lot of interviews or podcasts. He was on the Dave Rubin show, although I found that interview to be kind of lackadaisical, I would say.
Dave Rubin is not really much of an intellectual, right?
Yeah, right. So, but there's a podcast I came across called The Genius of Thomas Sowell, which I was able to it's as I was thinking about this podcast, this interview here with you, I was kind of thinking about processing some of the stuff. But yeah, it just seems like a lot of stuff is just common sense. He tries to operate in the way the world is. Right, that's his paradigm. Not like what he wants it to be, not what utopia is, but like what's the facts on the ground, and then like what's going on. And I feel like even in his interviews, he has a very matter of fact style of speaking. He's not a polemicist by any sense. He's not like someone, and it's funny when you hear people want to drop his name with like Larry Elder and Candace Owens in the same sentence, which is like honestly an insult to Thomas Sowell.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And I can't say I know much about Candace Owens or Larry Elder. I haven't really listened to consumed any of their content. I just know that they're pundits who are on the political right. So yeah, so that's it.
Candace, but Candace is a convert to republicanism, right? Herself, right? Well, she's a convert to the conservative party, right? I actually used to follow Candace before she became popular.
Okay.
I discovered her on YouTube. I used to look at her YouTube videos. She had a lot of criticism for Black people. I actually used to watch her videos, and then all of a sudden she blew up, and then the conservatives they caught on to her, and so she's more of a convert, And being a convert, like people like her are like trying to think of some other people, like I think the Hodge twins, and you have like the officer, what's his name, Officer Tatum. All these guys are they're like converts to conservatism, and in a certain degree, they're sort of like grifters to an extent, But Larry Elder is not really a grifter. He's a radio show host. He's actually much more read than most of them.
Right.
If anything, it was because of Larry Elder that I actually discovered Thomas Sowell, because I remember seeing an interview with him on Dave Rubin, as a matter of fact, right? Dave Rubin's interview with Thomas was Larry Elder, and Larry Elder was the one who brought up Thomas Sowell, and I was like, oh, who's this Thomas Sowell guy? And then I started to look into him, and then I discovered some videos, I have some books,
right?
So yeah.
No, he's written. I think he's written like 63 books, which is like, I don't know if I could. I don't know if I'll read 63 books in my lifetime, to be honest. But
Thomas Sowell, Larry
Thomas Sowell, yes, Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell.
He has a lot of books. He has probably like 20 books. Right?
No, I think they said 63 is what I heard.
Oh yeah. Oh yes. Well, yeah.
Yeah. So across like huge breadth, it's like all these journal articles and whatnot. But it's just like but the whole premise is that people don't know about him because he's someone that is like, I would say, unbeatable. I think you and I were talking offline once that a discussion between Chomsky and Sowell would be like just a bloodbath.
Yeah.
It
would.
And so therefore
Chomsky is really like losing it, and this whole idea is most recent talk, statements about like, people who don't get vaccine or anything, hey, well, if they can't eat, then they have to, they got to figure out that on their own. We don't have to feed them, right? So
that you mentioned the vaccine, the last little segment I wanted to cover with you. So obviously I think a lot of people if they follow your social media, they're seeing that you're making a lot of posts about the vaccine and mandates, and I wanted to explore some of these things with you. Just for the record, like just so you know where I'm coming from, I'm double vaxxed, right? I was one of the first probably available to get it. I never had a problem with the idea of getting the vaccine. My dad was double vaxxed, and my mom is, but they both got COVID like about a month ago, I want to say. My dad was hospitalized. But then I think about it, he had like comorbidities too, right? So I almost felt like if he didn't get the vaccine, he would have been in much worse shape. And my daughter, and the vaccine for the kid just came out, and so I had no problem getting her the first dose. So I'm just kind of laying it out there. But I wanted to hear your point of view, first of all, from COVID-19, and then we can kind of walk through into the vaccine and then the mandates and how politicians are using this kind of thing. But what's your take on COVID-19? Do you think it's something that is a disease that is dangerous for some people? Or is it something that because I've heard various strands, not from you, but like a lot of people are saying, well, it's a complete hoax, right? To this day, it doesn't. It's kind of a play by like higher authorities to instill fear and all this kind of stuff. But what's your take on COVID-19? Let's not talk about the vaccine yet, but COVID-19 in general and how in the politics around it.
Well, I mean, I'm familiar with certain scientists who actually do doubt the existence of COVID-19, but it does seem like the vast majority of them have accepted it as being a real virus. And I guess what probably fuels that belief is the fact that Fauci and others were experimenting with it in the Wuhan lab and also labs here in the U.S. But in particular, with regard to coronavirus, there are reports going back to 2015 that they were working on these things, and actually there are papers written about the coronavirus extracted from bats, right? And the question of whether or not it was ethical. And so during the Obama administration, the funding for it in the U.S. was cut off, but Fauci and his people found a way to circumvent that, and so they give this fund to the people in China, in Wuhan. At any rate, I'm not convinced that COVID-19 is not real. I'm in other words, I believe that it's real, right? I'm not one to. Some of my friends actually who've been trying to convince me that it's not real, but I think it is. But of course, it's dangerous for some people, right? But in the same way that the flu is also very dangerous for some people, right? There are, more than in excess of 600,000 people die from the flu every single year, right? And as we see here, when we look at the stats, that COVID-19 is only dangerous for about, and it's a significant minority because we have close to 9 billion people on the planet. It's about 0.1% of the planet, right? So you're talking about 99% or more than excess of 90% of the people on the earth are in no danger of from COVID. And then the other fact about COVID is that the median age of death from COVID is in excess of the normal lifespan of a human being, right? In other words, let's say if one country that the normal lifespan of a person is 82 years, the median age of those dying from COVID is probably about 85, right? And in the US is about, I think it's 78, which is the median age, but the median age is about 80 years old, right? So for instance, like recently, Colin Powell, he passed away, and they said he was double vaxxed, but he also had cancer. But the media, the way that they played it, they said, okay, well, Colin Powell, he died despite having been double vaxxed. Well, you could have just simply left that part out and just said, okay, Colin Powell died from cancer. Or you could say Colin Powell died from old age, right? We don't know exactly what the cause is, but there's this obsession with making every death since the beginning of the so-called crisis or pandemic. They've been insisting upon the idea that even if a person dies from something else, then we're going to label it a COVID death, right? So the numbers are clearly skewed. They say in the world, on the planet, about 4 million people have died. In the US, they say about 700,000 people have died. But it's definitely, the number's not that high. There's no doubt about it in my mind, because they've told us from the very beginning that we're counting every death of a person with COVID as a death from COVID. Right. So they're definitely, so from the very beginning, it's been politicized. And then even the number of cases of people who actually been infected with COVID is those, most of the cases, about three quarters of those cases are in what we call asymptomatic people. In other words, they utilize this test, the PCR test, to determine whether or not a person actually has the disease. And so it'll read as, okay, all right, you're positive, you have COVID. But those tests were never designed to prove that someone is actually sick, right? Those tests, even the person who made the actual PCR, the device, he said that they were never designed for that. It's just a way to make a lot of noise out of a lot of stuff, right? Or he said something like that, something to that effect. Right, and in a certain number of magnification, right? It's totally unreliable. This is why you can actually get a positive test in the morning, and later in the night you get a negative test. right? So the testing actually is bad. And this is the first time they say, in medical history, but actually they've been counting people as sick on the basis of them discovering something in their DNA, right? Rather than it based upon symptoms being expressed, right? Like, a fever, runny nose, or cough, things like that, right?
Sure.
So there's a whole lot that has gone into this whole pandemic that gives sufficient reason for people to doubt just how real it is.
All right. So therefore, you start with that whole, you start from that framework, and then I can't blame certain people, because I remember when it first happened, like people in authority sometimes they talk out of both sides of their mouth, right? They'll I remember when they first came out, it was like, oh, it's just gonna be 2 weeks, right? And and then it wasn't 2 weeks, and then it's like, well, you thought it was 2 weeks, or it's supposed to be, now it's been what, like almost
2 years,
yeah, November,
March of next year will be 2 years, in March of next year it'll be 2
right
years.
right, which is like 4 months away, right? Or 5 months away. It's not that far, you know what I'm saying? So we're like 18 months in, and originally it's like 2 weeks. So I think part of it is like frustration of like, hey, okay, you said it was 2 weeks, and then what? Certainly I think there's this but then we agree that there is a virus, but then I also can see your vantage point that, like, is there the way they're classifying the deaths? Because you really, certain cases you can know for sure if the person died from COVID, right? If they ended up with, like, because COVID-19, if you end up like blood clots in your lungs as a result, you didn't have them before, they say that's a side effect, and that blood clot eventually, if that's what kills you, then you can tie it. But if you have like something else, you have cancer, you already had cancer. Now, I don't know if they classify it that way because does COVID amplify symptoms of other diseases? I don't know. I'm asking you. I'm not. Go ahead.
I haven't read or seen anywhere where they've made that claim that that because of COVID this is amplified those issues. Now, what we do know is that that if you do have what they call comorbidity, and cancer is an example of that, right? That your system has already been weakened, your immune system has already been weakened to the extent that you're not strong enough to fight off,
right?
COVID, right? What's brought on by COVID. So in some ways, I guess I perhaps should sort of take that back. So it's like, right, that COVID, once you have it and you have one of these conditions, right, then it becomes harder for you to fight it off, and for that reason, that's why you die from it, right? And this is a fact that that's not highlighted that much. Is that 78% of the people who die from COVID are obese, right? And with obesity comes multiple comorbidities. The vast majority of people who are actually dying from COVID have an average of 3 comorbidities, right? And so you have that problem right there. They haven't been focusing on health. They haven't been focusing on diet. They haven't been focusing on exercise, right? And as a matter of fact, you're probably more, that there's some people who say that if you go to the hospital, you're probably more likely to die than if you stay at home, right? After you get it, right? Because you get there and they give you oxygen, they put you on a ventilator and things like that. And ventilators, according to the doctors, scientists, that have never been considered to be a treatment for some type of viral infection, right? It's there to kind of help you to breathe if you haven't struggling to be, but it's not there to cure you of anything. And actually, it can cause you can have like ICU induced pneumonia, right? From like ventilators as well, right? So a lot of people are dying in the hospital because of malpractice, right? And I actually believe that's what happened with my brother. May Allah have mercy on him. Is that and I saw there's an article that came out about 4 months ago.
So your brother passed from COVID?
Yeah, last year, early April of last year of 2020, right? So, and he was a nurse, right? But again, he was, he was obese, he had comorbidities, but the way that they went about treatment of him is that they put him on a ventilator, and then they gave him paralytics on top of that, meaning that they paralyzed him, right? So he couldn't move, right? So, and then all of a sudden, after giving him some experimental drug, his heart stops. And then, they, of course, is labeled a COVID death, right? And there's an article that I was saying, there's an article that came out about 4 months ago where they had admitted that in the early part of the pandemic, that doctors were scrambling. They didn't know what to do. They were so terrified on what could happen. They were afraid that if the COVID had spread throughout the hospital, then they're going to lose all of their staff, right? So anybody who came in who they suspected had COVID, they would put them on a ventilator. They would force them in the ventilator and put them to sleep, give them paralytics, right? And that itself was likely a major cause of many of the early deaths, because that they were doing it with these ventilators, right? So all these demands about ventilators was unfounded, right, medically, right? You see, and what's also happened is that that medicine now, that doctors have been prevented from practicing their art. They're being given orders from up top, being told what medicine they can and can't use, what type of treatments they can and can't use, right? Whereas before, doctors, say, hey, well, I've looked up the study, studied this particular medicine, and I think it might work, right, for this person. They're not allowed to do that anymore. You see, a lot of information has been censored, among other things, But we can't talk about, COVID being dangerous for some people without talking enough about who those people are. And we don't talk about that. That you would think that COVID is a death sentence for the vast majority of people, when that is actually false. It's actually the opposite. The vast majority of people, if they contract COVID, will survive. It'll be like, the flu would be like a common cold for some people, but kids will be almost nothing. It's totally unfounded. Doctors are saying, for many of these doctors, the kids, there are no studies on it either. There are no studies on what it would do to children, right? Even the FDA, when they approved it, there was at least one dissenter who said, listen, that you were making a big mistake, right? And a lot of kids are going to die from this. As a matter of fact, there's a report that came out, and I posted about this too, that since the vaccines have started to be given out to children, that the mortality rate has risen up to 52% in children, when it actually had dropped 14% prior to the start of this year, right? So in other words, more children are all of a sudden just simply dying now, and many suspect that the reason that they're trying to force everybody to get the vaccines, that we want, even if you can call them that, So again, that's another trick, is that to call them vaccines, and I'll come back to that in a second, is that they want everyone to get it, because if everyone's vaccinated, then they don't have a control group anymore, right? So let's say, for instance, 2, 3, 5 years from now, some new disease sort of pops up out of nowhere, right?
Right.
We can't connect it to the vaccines. Why? Because everybody's vaccinated. But if there's still a significant number of people who are not vaccinated, you have a control group, and you can say, okay, this new disease developed, and we find that it is found in only the vaccinated, but not in the unvaccinated, right? Right. So it has to be because of the vaccine, right? So there's no this idea of it being safe and effective, and you can't determine to be safe and effective, and then the other part is that it's not even effective, because the protection that it supposedly gives, it only first and foremost for the individual who takes it, right? Again, they say that it may reduce your symptoms, right? Right. But it doesn't protect you from being reinfected and infecting someone else, right? So it makes no sense for you to be demanding that everyone be vaccinated to protect the community. How are you protecting the community? No, I don't want to get vaccinated. I'm going to rely upon my natural, the natural processes, natural immunity, and let it play its course. If I don't know if I've even had COVID myself yet. I may have already had it. Maybe I won't. Maybe I won't get it. But there's some people say that everyone's going to get it eventually. Everyone's going to get COVID eventually, because
I've heard that, yeah.
It's an endemic disease, right?
Sure.
See? But I tell you this much: if I do get it, I'm not going to the hospital. I'm definitely not going to the hospital. I have no reason to go to the hospital to put my trust in these people. Right.
Well, I going back to what you're having to your brother, and I'm sorry to you hear that, but I think also, like you said in the beginning, like people just didn't know, like the kind of like fear that was going on. I remember I was talking to on previous guest of mine, Dr. Will Caldwell was talking about how when he saw that, he thought we would start dropping like flies,
yeah.
Right, and then And then he's like, wait a second, that's actually not what's happening, right? But in the beginning, that's
Well,
kind
you
of
don't know. You don't know what's happening because the VAERS reporting system, which is
right.
connected with the CDC,
Mm-hmm.
they're not sharing that information with the public. They're not reporting on it in the mainstream media. You have over 150,000 reports of adverse events and deaths, right?
Mm-hmm.
From the vaccine, but that's not something that they're emphasizing. More people have died from this one vaccine that have died from the other vaccines that have all been all combined since they've been created, right? Yeah. So there are more reports of deaths from this particular vaccine or these particular vaccines than the previous, with smallpox or measles, whatever, all these others, right, put together, right? They expect anytime they come up with a vaccine that a certain number of people are actually going to die. But this one is massive, right? At least with regard to reporting, but they're not giving consideration to that when they actually decide that they're actually going to put these things out into the public.
What I was saying was, I'm talking about like in the beginning of the pandemic, some people thought like COVID was gonna, like people were just gonna be dropping on the street, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And so doctors, like you said, I like, I think it would be fair that they, you said they don't know how to handle this new disease. They're trying to figure things out, and that's what that was the rationale behind why they put people on ventilators off the bat. And in hindsight, it was like the wrong move. You're trying to work something out. Like in my dad's situation, for example, right? He was in the beginning, I was like, when he first got it, I was like, well, you got double vaxxed, you should just fight through it, right? But he also was a chain smoker for 22 years of his life. I mean, he started when he was 12. That means he quit when he was 34. But still, it's like sometimes the effects, like, depends on. There's some people will say it's like he never smoked. My wife, who's also a physician, was like, no, it's like the damage. You smoke for 22 years. You still, I mean, the body just there's still something there, right?
Yeah.
So for him, it was an issue of like his oxygen level started to dip, and he had to go to the hospital. He never got to the point.
No, I get. I'm fine. I'm not saying at all that people shouldn't get it. Right.
Or I'm saying like, well, as far as that going to the hospital, because you mentioned you wouldn't go to the hospital, right? But I think the treatments involved. Like, what are you going to do if your oxygen level starts dropping? What do you just like hope you?
I'm just going to ride it out. Just going to ride it out. I mean, and I would rather die in my home with my family around me than to be locked up in some place with some people I don't even know.
Well, there won't even be that. It's gonna be it sounded like I do want to see one of these rooms because it sounds pretty miserable because it's like a vacuum. You can't sleep in there. It's like really loud. Because I remember when he would call me, you hear this like vacuum running in the background, right? And there's nobody else really allowed in there. You need like a double, like all this stuff. So I see your point is that there's people who are dying. It's a really terrible way to go because people who are dying in the hospital, like their family can't be there. It's over FaceTime. I mean, like it's really caused some damage. So moving into the so COVID, you acknowledge that COVID obviously is a virus that for some people is it, and I agree with you that there's not a focus on health, but the thing of it is, like, sad to say, the average American, I would have to assume the majority of Americans have comorbidities because of how they eat. The standard American diet is conducive to creating obesity.
Yeah, about 60% of the population is overweight, right? I mean, we have we said the richest country in the world, but the sickest population, right? That we have more hospitals and all these other things because our hospitals are not into actually curing people. It's about sustaining life so they can continue to make their money. And again, I think that this is a part that a lot of people don't want to accept, right? That there is this type of evil that does exist in the world, right? I mean, listen, did you know like the FDA that about 45% of their funding comes from big pharma?
I mean, I think I saw you posted about that.
No, it's on their website. You go to their website, okay. It's right there. They show you. They tell you 55% of their funding comes from the government. That's it. The other 45% come from outsiders. I mean, part of it, they charge the companies, who actually want to get approval for their drugs. There's a charge that goes
right.
And because of that, and then you have like these individuals who, and again, I'm just not just pulling these, making up things or just sort of sharing things that other people share with me. It's about research, right? So, it's if when doctors and scientists are being censored, when information, crucial information, is being censored, somebody has to share it. And the thing that's unfortunate to me is that Muslim medical experts, quote unquote, are not, they're not properly informing our community, right? And we have a lot of Muslim doctors and medical experts, and they know I've spoken to some of these doctors, right? On phone calls, and they agree with me. They know that what I say is true, right? But, and I understand, it's like we were talking about before, people, when they start to get threatened, their lives threatened, their livelihoods threatened, or you're going to they're going to take away your license if you spread misinformation about COVID, right? And this actually they've been warned. They've actually been threatened in that particular fashion, right? You're not going to come out and say certain things. On the other hand, you have these other factions who are like they're pro vaccine mandate, right? And they themselves are really uncritical, right, of Fauci. They've made a Faucian bargain, right? And it's like whatever Fauci says goes, right? And they just go with Fauci, even though himself is a proven liar. He's lied multiple times, right? He's lied over and over and over. He's not a trustworthy. I mean, listen, he's working with the government. They're messing with these pathogens, right, and trying to make them more virulent. And, for a person, who's willing to be so reckless, even to go to the extent to say that even if a pandemic happens, it will be worth it scientifically. That's his attitude. That's his belief. He stated that it doesn't matter, even if there's a leak from a lab, and there are always lab leaks. People don't realize this. There are always lab leaks, right? But he said that even if it leads to a pandemic, the scientific information that we would learn will be worth all of that. So in other words, it doesn't matter who dies, right? He doesn't care. And so, and this is the person that we're pulling all of our trust in. You see, sure. He's lied about the issue of masking. He's lied about like herd immunity. He talked about like, oh, we need 50% of the country to be vaccinated. Things. Oh, no, we need 80%, 90%. Keep changing the bar. He said that we didn't need to have a mandate. And then he changed and say, oh, now we have to. He's in support of all the mandates, right? Same thing with Biden and all that. I mean, so the people are being lied to on a regular basis. You see, there's no reason that we have to trust these people. You see. And again, if we go back to the start of our conversation, remember we were talking about Obama, right? Right. So where it started with the Muslim community, how this shift developed, where all of a sudden we go from this trusting the West to now completely trusting the West, right? Right. And we have to understand that although you may say, okay, well, I'm not trusting the West, I'm trusting the doctors and I'm trusting the scientists. They said, no, you're really not. You're trusting the administrative state because they're the ones dictating to the doctors and the scientists what they're allowed to say to you. Right? Yeah, right. Right.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And I definitely agree that the goalpost, because I remember when they first said like, okay, the lockdowns are for because the hospital beds, right? We want to stabilize that, right? And granted, we haven't gone back to lockdowns. Now you're in California. So I heard it's pretty bad in California, like as far as like regulations and stuff being shut down. And I interviewed Yusuf Clack. I interviewed him like a few months back. He lost his gym, right? Which is interesting. The whole idea, the gyms should have been like the one place, because I don't know how many people could tell you like that they put on like bad body fat because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Right.
One of the things interesting about California is that California is has one of the lowest case rates in the whole country. Okay. But we've had one of the most draconian lockdowns that the entire country had, right? New York kind of makes sense, right, to an extent, but California, no, never really made any sense, right? And then on top of that is that, yeah, we said, okay, we need to lock down. Why? Because we don't want the emergency services to be overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, how do we keep people from having to go to the ER? What do? You utilize drugs that will keep them out of the ER. So instead of them allowing for instance, so Trump said something about hydroxychloroquine. Everybody, oh my God, Trump said it can't be right? And even though hydroxychloroquine has been around for some time, right? Already that it's clearly could reduce the symptoms. Ivermectin, was Joe Rogan, right? Joe Rogan talked about all these things that he took, monoclonal, I forgot what the name of this thing.
Sure.
I'm right. But ivermectin, he mentioned all these other things, right? That he took, and the CNN focused on ivermectin and talk, oh, he took horse dewormer, right? Yeah, and they lied multiple times about it, and as if like ivermectin is some new drug, it hasn't been tested. It's one of the safest drugs that we got, But other countries that are using it, India used it, one particular province in India, and anything because of ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine and other things like that, they actually came out of lockdown. I mean, so it's really interesting that we complain about, okay, well, we don't want too many people in the ER and the ICU. We don't have enough. We can't accommodate everybody. But you actually want to allow people to utilize the drugs that actually will keep them from having to come to the hospital to begin with, right? And then on top of that, you fire nurses and doctors because they refuse to get the vaccine, right? Oh, they care so much about us. They want us to live. And it's some demonic stuff happening. There's very evil stuff happening right now. Right. And there's no good reason for anyone to trust them. Right. So this idea of, no, I don't plan on getting vaccinated. I don't plan to get my kids vaccinated. No, I don't. Right. And I think it's crazy for anyone to trust that something insidious is not happening right now. Right. Globally.
Can't you have the opinion that or are you open to the idea that so I agree with a lot of the points you made as far as they're not focusing on health, personal health. Right. They keep shifting the goalposts, right? Even Sanjay Gupta on the Rogan Experience said that most masks that we wear are pointless.
Yeah.
Right. He said that.
Well, it's not so much, it don't matter what he says, it's about what the studies show.
Right. But as far as the opening, the narrative of what you hear in the as far as what people are, because that's how people generally, most people, 99% of people, myself included, we're not going to read some study, put us to sleep, right? To be honest.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
We're just going to we're going to follow, my wife's in the medical field. So it's kind of I do take some, what she tells me, I consider that. But I think I think that the vaccine could still be so me, obviously I trusted the vaccine. I think that pharma companies can be financially vested in it and expect that they are going to try to milk the hell out of it. Yeah. At the same time, believing that the vaccine is actually going to work.
Yeah, right? Sure. I think they do. I think that's a win-win for them. It's a win-win for them that if it works and they make a bunch of money.
Right. So yeah. So to me, that's kind of how I approach it personally, is that now. But now I can certainly see where this issue of mandates and lockdowns is from a philosophy point of view comes into play, because if you require mandate, because to me, I was my initial thought when I got that vaccine was well, yeah, everyone should get it. It makes sense. But now when you could see how, in Australia, right? I think they had a slight little uptick and they shut the whole freaking place down, right? And I was whoa, that's crazy. Right? So that's the thing. It's okay, so now you're going to have these mandates. What is that going to open the door for? Is it going to be, lead to something further, more draconian measure? Or is it going to be something when we're a kid, we all get for let me ask you, you don't have to answer this. You don't want to if it's personal, but do you get other vaccines like measles, bumps, that kind of stuff? Or
I've had my measles,
the MMR,
stuff like that.
Right. Yeah.
I don't get the flu shot. I don't. Right. Yeah. I don't get the flu shot. I just feel I need it.
Yeah, I get the flu shot, but it's an issue of convenience because they offer it at work, and I just go downstairs for 5 minutes and get it done. I get a lollipop. So it's it's just it's not. I mean, but I don't think about it. Yeah.
Now for me, it just I feel pointless. Why put something in my body? I don't even know what it is. I don't know what's going to happen to do it. And then add on top of that, like I said, every single person I know who gets a flu shot, they get the flu.
Okay.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
And I haven't had the flu in probably the past 15 years.
Right?
Gotcha. And I never get the flu shot. Right.
Right. Sure.
So and again, I'm not asking for anything to happen to me, but I'm just saying.
Yeah. Right.
That's been my experience.
Right. But do you think that maybe the mandate is just another phase of COVID-19 mandate is just gonna be some people was well, you already get the MMR, Or now, when we go to Hajj or Umrah, you got to take like Saudi Arabia requires before COVID-19 some vaccinations, right? They require something. They check you at the airport and all that stuff,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So why can't COVID just be another one of those? Like,
Because it's not the same, because
okay,
in the vaccine is not the same as the other vaccines, right? So for one, the other diseases that they want people to get vaccinated for are much more dangerous, and they're dangerous for everyone, not just for certain people, right? And then two, the nature of the vaccine, that this mRNA vaccine is not a traditional vaccine. It's based upon a new type of technology, right? And this is the first time they've ever used it in this particular fashion on this many people throughout the planet. It's a big experiment. Everybody's a guinea pig right now. People don't want to accept that, but that's the facts. Up until recently, the vaccine was only approved under emergency use authorization, right? Which means it's experimental, right? It's not. You can't claim that it's not experimental. When it's under emergency use authorization, it's no longer experimental when you say it is now approved, right? But most of the people before that time had already received it when it was in this experimental stage, right? Sure. And we still don't have any long-term studies. Most vaccines take 5-10 years to be approved, right? It takes a long time for you to really know, because you have to have a history. You have to look and see how it affects people. You follow people for a long time to really know what those major issues are that they develop. We haven't had any of that happen. These things were rushed. They came about as a new type of technology. And then also add on top of this, these vaccines don't give you any long-term protection to begin with, right? So it's like they say that as they start to wane within the first couple of weeks or first couple of months, right? You get 60%, 40% protection. You can be reinfected, right? And this is why they shifted. It's like they were talking about you won't get COVID. Now the manufacturers never said that, but the media did say that. The media said, the manufacturer never said it. They always said from the start, they might have said 90%, or then they dropped 60%, but they never said 100%. They never said 100%, right? Sure. So why would I get a vaccine in order to protect other people when it doesn't do that? Right, it doesn't do that, right? So it's not you. There's a false equivalency. This sort of people talk, well, you got other vaccines, so why can't you get it? It's not the same. That's why it's a false equivalency. There's no one-to-one correlation between this one and those, right? So and under all circumstances, people should have the right to refuse. It's my body. It's not yours. The government doesn't own my body. You don't own my body, and I don't want to get this in my body. If I get hurt and I die, hey, that's my choice, right? I'm not a child. And you're not going to tell me, how to live my life, right? So that's, that used to be common sense at one time, right? Now everybody's like, hey, well, even if you don't want to get it, we're going to make sure you get it. I don't see any basis for Muslim support of this, right? It's really embarrassing to me to see how much Muslim support they have behind this mandate issue. And I get emails every single day from people from Canada, desperate, listen, I'm going to lose my job. My kids, they're trying to get my kids to give them the vaccine. I don't want them to get the vaccine. Sometimes kids have autoimmune issues and they don't want to give them extra vaccines for that reason, and none of the imams there are giving them any support, because the imams have decided that there's, that this is okay and Muslim, and we support the mandate, right? So the Muslims in Canada have no support. Australia, they have no support, right? And it's really shameful. It's really shameful, right, for me to see this, and so when people see me as like I'm some contrarian. No, I'm about not being contrarian. It's about being sincere and committed to my religion and my understanding of the Quran and Sunnah. This is what I'm doing.
So you don't have a problem. It's like, if people want to have the choice to have the vaccine, you're not saying don't get the vaccine. If that's what you need, if it makes you comfortable, the mandate is really the crux of it right now.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You can do whatever you want. I mean, some people may need it, right? Again, older people, people with, again, extremely obese and things like that. It might, again, if it seems to be, proven to reduce the symptoms for those people, then it might be for you. But this idea that I got to get it, my kids got to get it, my wife got to get it, everybody around me got to get it. Why? What's the point of it? You see, when I could actually potentially get more harmed by it than the actual COVID virus. Right?
Yeah. So for me, it's kind of like the way I approach it. So I go to a gym. I bet most of those people at the gym ain't got the
Mhm.
vaccine. It's a Trump gym. Have you ever been to these like bodybuilding gyms?
Mhm.
There's like an F Biden sticker up in there and a blue light and a flag with like the blue stripe.
Go Brandon.
Right. Yeah, that kind of thing, right? It's like guns are welcome here. It's that kind of gym, right? Even like they have a sign in the front for all these like optics. You walk in, there's nothing going on,
Mhm.
right? I train jujitsu. You got guys breathing on you. You know what I'm saying? It's like, but I'm like, I got the vaccine, so it like to me, it's like, all right, the vaccine should do what it's supposed to do. If it doesn't, I get COVID. Hopefully, it's a mild case or whatever, right? But yeah, with the mandate and stuff. So what about this religious exemption? So I don't know if you saw this story. Nick Rolovich, he was the head football coach at Washington State up until a couple of weeks ago. So
Mhm.
Washington State University put out this policy that all their employees had to be vaccinated, right? There's a
Mhm.
plan, and he got this thing, and he tried to him and his four assistants lost their job. He was trying to argue from a point of view of having a religious exemption. He's Catholic. My understanding is the Pope vouched for the vaccine.
Mhm.
Um, so how does a religious exemption work? Like what kind of like that's a part I'm really confused on is how can you argue for religious exemption when like the Catholic Church, for example, the Pope is saying it's okay. You can't even do Umrah or Hajj now without the vaccine,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. Yep.
It's almost like you need the vaccine to do certain things, and our like establishments are saying you got to get it. How can we argue religious exemption? I would say.
Well, easy because I mean we don't have an establishment. We don't have like a magisterium or a clergy class in Islam
Sure.
first and
Right.
foremost,
Mhm.
and so who cares that an institution, right, gave a particular, like it can be Azhar University, it can be Contrarian University, it can be Medina University. It doesn't matter. Yeah, it comes from there because for us that has never been the way that you determine official religious teaching, right, on the basis of like some official in a particular government or other type of institution. The other thing is that, I mean, the issue of the Pope, I mean, okay, again, the Pope is not God, and the Pope's position was that it's permissible to do it.
Okay.
And what's happened is that because he said it's permissible, you have to get it. Say, well, that's not the same. Permissible is not the same as compulsory, right? They're two different rulings, right? So saying it's permissible still says I have my own prerogative. I can choose not to get it, right? So it doesn't mean that I have to get it. It means that I can choose not to get it. And this is another mistake that the local governments are. I just saw some documentation from somebody from Canada yesterday, an employer, who had, sent a letter to a brother telling him this, reject your religious exemption application, and these are the reasons. So she lists all these Muslim organizations who they say it's okay to get it, right? And so even though I, in my fatwa, is saying that with regard to this individual, that he's against it, and so for him it's haram for him to get it based upon his conscience, then so they say we don't care because these people that we know say they otherwise. That's not the way it works, right? Right. And so we've always had the right to be a conscientious objector to wars, right? Soldiers are able to do that, right? The Prophet said something that forced Hassan ibn Thabit to go fight in the wars. Hassan didn't, he wasn't a fighter. He didn't like to fight. But the Prophet said, no, you're coming anyway. No, he didn't. People always had the right to be conscientious objectors, even in the Western context, that you have a First Amendment right, with regard to religion, follow our conscience, and freedom of thought, among other things, right? So that's in the secular sense, but even in the religious sense, it's always been the case. So who cares what Sheikh Al-Azhar says, or the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia says about this thing, or even the fact that the Saudi government decides that that in order for you to come make Hajj, that you have to be fully get this vaccine. That doesn't make it right. Mm-hmm. That doesn't make it in line with or coincide with the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He sees it, right? So everyone will remain sort of rooted in their positions, and we continue. We'll keep fighting it out, But I actually have to go right now, but go ahead. I know you probably had some.
I just had like 5 more minutes.
Okay.
Yes. So real quick. So yeah. So I think in the case of Muslims, because depending on which fatwa you follow, you could argue that if you get a fatwa for it, because we don't have a institution, right? But for the Catholic Church, okay, so the Pope said it's permissible, right? Yeah. So then a Catholic can't, but I don't see how a Catholic can then say it's a religious exemption because his church is now neutral on it. He's not saying you can't, you know what I'm saying? Like it takes it out of the equation. So he has to argue from a different, so I would have no issue with it if he came from a point of view like, all right, I've got other, like, I think, Aaron Rodgers, right? Aaron Rodgers ends up saying like he's allergic to some of the components of the two of the Moderna and the Pfizer, right? And so that's why so I'm like, all right, if you have medical conditions, you should be able to present those, right? So I'm like, but why is dude arguing for a Catholic exemption when the Pope says it's permissible? That's to me, it's hard to register because
the
structure of the Catholic Church, right?
Yeah, but that didn't sound like a religious argument he's making. That sounded like he was making a medical argument. So if he says he's allergic to certain components, that's a medical argument he's making. He's not making a religious argument.
I'm talking about Aaron Rodgers made a medical argument, right? But I'm saying the coach of Washington State, he made a religious argument and not a medical argument. I would say he should have made a medical argument or some kind of other argument, not a religious argument, because if he's a Catholic, that's what he's known as, and then he's arguing as a Catholic, I can't get that.
Well, I think because he has good reason, because there are other like bishops who would disagree with the Pope, right? Okay. on that thing, like, and I think it's one Pavoni, I forget his name. They disagree with the position of the Pope on his the whole Great Reset idea and support of the vaccinations. So there's actually no agreement within the Catholic Church, right? Even though the Pope has this position, right? But again, even if we were to say, okay, there was agreement among all of the bishops, with the Pope, like saying that it's permissible is not the same as saying that it's compulsory, right?
Correct.
This is because they said it's okay for you to get it doesn't mean that you have to get it, right? Right. So they're two different things, right? So, and what we're trying to do and I've seen this sloppy fiqh as well amongst some of the ulama, similar arguments, it's permissible to get the vaccine, therefore you have to get it. No, this makes no sense. That's not doesn't follow logically, that I have to get it just simply because you declared it to be permissible. No, I don't have to get it, right? I mean, it's permissible for me to, I don't know, it could be almost anything, but this mean it permits me to drink orange juice. But it doesn't mean I have to get orange juice. I have to drink orange juice. So,
are you prepared? Last question: Are you prepared to like maybe never go to the haram again? Or do you think that over time you're mentally prepared for that? Or do you think it's something in like 10 years that, okay, the COVID-19 vaccine's been out for 10 years. We know we have more data on it and the Band-Aid's still there, but
I'm still not going to get it.
You still wouldn't get it.
Because I don't trust these people because they're liars, right? So, and those who are custodians of the Haramain themselves are untrustworthy people as well. So it's, and I don't think there's going to be the vaccine is only going to be around temporary. Right now, they're rolling out pills right now. So they're about on their next money-making endeavor right now. So they're already producing pills that you can just take, pick them up like a regular prescription, pretty much they're ivermectin, just under a different name because they couldn't the patent of ivermectin ran out, so, and it was cheap pills, they couldn't make any money off of it. So they had to demonize it among other types of drugs, so, so, and it's not going to stop. Be assured that this is not going to stop at 2 shots. You're going to have to get the booster too, eventually. And then next year, you're going to have another regime of vaccinations, right? Because it's already happened in Israel. Look, Israel, the main test site, the biggest test site of this right now. Just watch what's happening in Israel, and you'll see what they're trying to bring to everywhere else, right? And in America, and I would say this lastly, that America is the final frontier for what we call the Great Reset, right? But what makes it difficult here in America is that we have a Second Amendment and so many people with guns, right? So it's much more difficult for what's happening in Australia to happen here for that very reason, right?
Right.
So, and you have, again, Republican parties pushing back against these things, and one more reason to actually support the conservatives rather than the Democrats, who actually is the party of tyranny right now. All this tyranny is happening right now. People complained about it and claimed that it was happening under Trump. None of it was happening. Now it's actually happening, and everybody's, quiet. Nobody's saying anything, right? And you can see it right in our face. If anything, we're actually a part of the tyranny that we actually contributing to it. We're on board with it. The Muslims, unfortunately, right? You see, so. at any rate,
All right,
Zard,
appreciate it. Dr. Abdullah bin Hamid Ali, always a pleasure having a conversation with you. Man, we went for like 2 hours, almost over 2 hours. I'll have your social media links in the down in the show notes. For my listeners out there, if you have any questions or comments, you can email me at info@sultansandsneakers.com and leave a 5-star review if wherever you're listening to your podcast. This is Mahina Podcaster signing off.